Thank you, Bruce, for the introduction and for bringing me here. I very much appreciate it, and thank you to Bunch of Grapes Bookstore, which sounds like a bookstore much, much more worth preserving than some major bookstores I can think of. I do think there's some truth to that. I think there was a guy from Massachusetts named John Adams who said that we should have a nation of laws, not men. We now very much have a nation of men, not laws. I'm not a fan of slavery. I'm not a fan of only rich white males should run the country. I'm not a fan of many practices and theories and motivations behind what the people who put this country together did. I'm not a fan of the use of violence that they employed to break this country off from England. But the incredibly advanced and innovative and generous and principled and democratic with a small d thinking that went into framing the Constitution with all its flaws is absolutely stunning, and it was designed with great humility and made quite easy to amend as times changed and opinions advanced and progressed and evolved. And we've barely tweaked the thing. Right? There were a dozen amendments immediately proposed, part of the bargain to get the thing ratified in the first place. And we got 10 of them immediately. We got an 11th one 2 centuries later. Other than that, there have been 16 amendments. 2 of them to get rid of alcohol and bring it back. Several of them to tweak how you elect the president. We barely touched the thing. This was cutting edge. This is maybe the most influential document of its type in history. And it's dragging. It's behind many other countries' constitutions. There are many international treaties that give people rights around the world, and we are one of the few holdouts on so many important treaties. So there are certainly things I would like to go back to, and in a fundamental sense, I would always like to go back to whatever the law is right now, because when you decide that you can simply violate laws because you are the president or you are the government or you are a high official, then you can violate any law, right? We are in a world where we have international laws now. And torture is something that is banned by international law in such a way that no nation can legalize it. And that is a very good thing and should not be violated. If that is to be undone, it must be undone through the proper process, or we destroy international law. But we also have national laws. We have a constitution that says any treaty we are a party to is the supreme law of our land. Well, President Reagan signed a treaty banning all torture, banning all acts complicit in torture, requiring the investigation and active prosecution and prevention of torture. We put a law on the books in the U.S. Code of Law when President Clinton was president that criminalized torture, every act of complicity in torture. We have another statute on war crimes that does the same thing. And so then to go through this Bush-Cheney crime spree of 8 years and have this debate over whether we should ban torture or keep it legal when it's illegal, when it was banned in the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, when it's been banned by a dozen treaties we're a party to, when it's a felony in the U.S. Code, to go through this charade, to have the president, to have Congress pretend they're banning torture, first of all, and then have the Congress write a signing statement throwing that out, saying, no, I disagree with this law. As I sign it into law, I'll torture if I want to. And then to have Congress respond to that, not by saying, what the hell's going on? This was redundant anyway. It was already illegal. Or we need to look into some criminal prosecutions here, or you're looking at an impeachment, buddy. No, what did they do? Does anybody recall what Congress did? Nothing. No, worse. I'd say worse than nothing. Comically worse than nothing. They said, I've got an idea. let's ban torture again. So then that's where you have the debate between Dick Cheney, who wants to keep torture legal, and John McCain, who wants to ban it, except an exception for the CIA would be okay, and so forth. And so then they ban it with an exception for the CIA. And bills get voted down that would ban torture, bills passed that would ban torture, and it's all a charade. And you come to a new Congress and a new White House, and you have a new director of Central Intelligence, a guy named Leon Panetta, who says at his confirmation hearing, who says repeatedly, who you can find on YouTube, saying, that the president still has the power to torture. He's just going to choose not to use it right now. David Axelrod, presidential advisor in the White House to President Barack Obama, you can watch a clip of a TV producer asking him 4 times, does the president claim the right to torture and he's just not using it right now? Or is it forbidden? Can't get a straight answer. Cannot get a straight answer. And so you have a president who comes in and on his second day in office, I think it was, puts out an executive order banning torture. Except that his staff says he'll still do it if he wants to, if he needs to, and future presidents, of course, can then do it if they need to. And we maintain the policy of rendition. Rendition is kidnapping someone here or abroad and sending them to some other country abroad to be tortured. And one of the airplanes that we used frequently for this during the Bush-Cheney years was spotted last month at the airport in Birmingham, England, making some kind of an exchange. Now, we don't know if that means anything or not, but we know that the White House claims the power and the intention to engage in rendition. And we know that a gentleman from Canada 6 years ago made the mistake, and this was the only thing he did wrong, of changing planes at an airport in New York City, at which point we kidnapped him and sent him off to another country to be tortured, and told them how to torture him. The Canadian government didn't do everything it could to stop this. The Canadian government has apologized formally on behalf of their nation and compensated him $9 million. Last week, a U.S. court ruled that he has no claim, that it would endanger our national security to even deal with the matter, and rendition is not, in any sense, a crime because we didn't call it kidnapping, we called it rendition. The good news is that on the same day, 22 CIA agents and 1 member of the United States Air Force were convicted of the very same crime of kidnapping in Italia. Bel Paese, Forza Italia, because you should be writing letters to Italian newspapers and the Italian embassy and saying, thank you, we encourage you. Our brothers and sisters enforcing our laws for us because we are not doing it. And we should let them know that if the United States does not extradite these people, the United States does support the practice of rendition. Tell the Italians where these people live. Let them come be kidnapped. That's the rule of law in this country now. We support that. So I do think there are perhaps conservative, perhaps liberal, whatever you want to call them. There are values that we've had that we still think we have. If you go to tourist sites in Boston, they'll tell you about the glories of our rights as Americans. Load of crap. They will tell you stuff that is not true at the tourist sites in Washington and Philadelphia, in your high schools. They will tell you about our rights that we do not have. President Obama made a speech in front of the United States Constitution in the National Archives and did away, finally, with the only right given to us in the Constitution prior to the amendments. You know what I'm talking about?
liberty and the pursuit of happiness?
Well, that's the beautiful preamble to the Constitution, and I suppose you got me, and there are some other rights we sort of have there, but this is a right to something called habeas corpus. And it says explicitly in the Constitution, in the main text of the Constitution, that it shall not be taken away from anyone. Now, Attorney General Alberto Gonzales went and testified with a straight face to the United States Congress that it doesn't say anybody had it in the first place. It just says you can't take it away from them. I swear to God. So this is the right that prevents people in Guantanamo killing themselves. This is why people in Guantanamo have killed themselves. This is suicide prevention. Habeas corpus means you can't just be locked up permanently without any explanation, without being charged with a crime, without any due process, without any hope, right? Even if it's done by a hope monger, it cannot be done. It's not legal. This is a right that's been developed for 8 centuries, since the Magna Carta. And it was destroyed by the Bush-Cheney co-presidency. They just behaved as if it didn't exist. They just locked people up, called it detaining them, called them enemy combatants as a new category of human beings who don't have rights in places like Bagram and Guantanamo and black sites, as they called them, around the world. And, you know, it's one thing for one White House to do such a thing, and then a new Congress or a new White House or the courts to undo it. But when you have another White House come in and say, well, we're going to formalize this and paper over it with some pretense of due process and have regularly scheduled reviews of the people we're imprisoning forever and ever without charge, then it becomes harder and harder to undo it. And the Supreme Court has a habit of treating things, at least up to a point, as having been established practice once they are established practice. So we're in a more dangerous situation now. We had, as I've mentioned, President Bush rewriting laws with signing statements as he signs them into law. And we had the most eloquent denunciations of that I've ever heard from candidate Obama, who now does the same thing, and who says that on a case-by-case basis he might throw out some of Bush's law-altering signing statements if he chooses to. And then presumably the next president will pick which of Bush and Obama's signing statements and laws to throw out and which ones to keep. That is a nation of men, or maybe women someday, but not of laws. I mentioned executive orders doing things like banning torture. That's great. We want to ban torture, but it was banned. It was banned legally in a real law, and to have major national policies set by executive order, as is the practice now, is not what the founders had in mind. Neither is having the president tell Congress what bill to write in the first place so that it goes through Congress, which is established pattern now, be it health care or any other issue. And certainly not telling a lawyer in the Justice Department to write a secret memo legalizing a blatant crime. That is not a way you make a law in a traditional or conservative or liberal sense. If you had no expense, take the public treasury, go hire whatever team of lawyers you want, and tell them to write a bunch of memos you can keep in your pockets, legalizing crimes you want to commit. Now, I know most of you don't have any particular interest in committing any crimes, but if you did, that's absolute power. That's absolute power. We're talking about a president with massive secret budgets, the biggest military ever seen, the federal government at his disposal, and lawyers can write secret memos he can put in his pocket to legalize blatant crimes. That is as close to absolute power as you're going to get. And so what are we doing now? The Justice Department has announced these people will not be prosecuted, not the people who ordered it, not the lawyers who wrote the memos. And instead, we're going to consider prosecuting some people who may have strayed from the illegal policies in the secret memos. Right? One of these memos legalizes aggressive war. A lot of them legalize torture, personalized custom laws, how you can torture this particular guy, right? And you're going to, as well as in general, how you can torture anybody, and you can engage in this grotesque, brutal practice 35 times, but not 36, and all these these really revolting limitations and professionalism in it. And there's some people who went too far. I mean, of course, in most cases, none of the people doing the torture had any idea these memos existed. The torture began before the memos were written. I mean, it's all this crazy idea that these memos could possibly have justified anything. But they're going to take 3 cases maybe where people went beyond what was in the memos, including, killing people. There are hundreds of cases where we actually torture people to death. And those are the only ones that we can prosecute at the slow rate we do anything, because there's a statute of limitations on the ones where there's no dead body. And they're going to consider the possibility of formally considering prosecuting those people and try not to do that. So for foreign nations who refuse to take up these kind of cases during the Bush-Cheney years because the United States might do it ourselves, that excuse is gone. We've made clear we're not going to do it ourselves. There's a town in Massachusetts called Amherst. Anybody know what kind of resolution they passed a couple days ago?
They're going to take 2 prisoners.
Yeah, we welcome prisoners from Guantanamo. If they're freed, they should come here.
Oh.
2, well...
The Uyghurs too?
I'm sorry?
The Uyghurs too? That are sitting in Palau now?
Some of them are. Some are in Bermuda. Some are still in Guantanamo. I don't know who, if anyone, is going to go to Amherst, but I would love to see Amherst not be the only town that passes that kind of resolution. I think everybody should be passing that resolution. I would love to see the 3 towns in Vermont and Maine not be the only ones that have passed ordinances that say if Bush or Cheney comes here, they must be arrested. I would love to see all of the resolutions that can be moved at the local level that influence states and federal officials. I would love to see moved in good localities like this one. The other key power that disturbs me that presidents now have is the power of war, because we don't declare war anymore as the Constitution requires. Congress would prefer not to make these decisions. They just leave it to the president. So what we're doing in Pakistan, we just don't call it a war. What we're doing in Afghanistan or Iraq, we initiate it with a vague authorization to use force, and we make it look good. You're required to report to us why and all that. And so the president sends a pack of lies in a report, which is a felony, to Congress, and then goes ahead and invades Iraq, and in fact had already begun invading Iraq with money he just took from Afghanistan, which is unconstitutional. Congress knows and doesn't care. We then have the United Nations, which to its enormous credit said, no, don't do it, it's illegal. Said, well, okay, now you're there, we'll have an occupation, and we'll sort of approve of the occupation up until the end of December 2008. So what does George W. Bush do? He's about to leave and go golf for life or whatever he does now. And only a couple months later, the fig leaf is going to be gone for the occupation of Iraq. Well, he says, I've got a puppet, I've got an occupied government, I'll make a treaty with them. I'll make a treaty that says 3 more years of war. I'll put the power of making war into a treaty. And then, I just won't ask the Senate because, that it'd be nicer if presidents from now on could just make treaties without asking the Senate. And he does that. And it really gets under the skin of a bunch of senators. One of the angriest was a guy named something like Obama, I think it was. And a guy named Biden puts in a bill that says we won't fund the occupation of Iraq anymore unless the Senate gets to say yes or no on this. Now, guess who uses this treaty as their fig leaf for occupying Iraq, despite the fact that they quite openly don't intend to comply with it, are not complying with it now, and it requires being out completely, every troop, every mercenary, by the end of 2011. And General Odierno has said, that's crazy, we're not going to actually be out. And last week, Congress required monthly reports on the progress toward being out at that date. and gave their blessing to that date that they had never been asked about in the first place, sort of giving their blessing to treaties created without them. And the big question then becomes, what do they do? What does Congress do if they don't get these monthly reports, or the monthly reports are obviously lying, or the monthly reports speak honestly about these permanent cities that we call bases in Iraq? There are only a couple of things that Congress can do to check the other branches of the government. One is to subpoena people. They can subpoena Robert Gates, the Secretary of War under Bush and Obama, and make him come in and explain. But what happens to subpoenas? You know, if you or I get a subpoena and we say, you know, I gotta go buy shoes that day, we're going to jail. We are going to jail. We are under laws. We are the people under the law who have very little to do with making it. But what about the people who make the laws, who operate above it?
They ignore it with impunity.
They ignore it with impunity. They say, and in the words of Condoleezza Rice, I'm not inclined to show up. Or in the words of Dick Cheney, I'm a member of the executive branch, except tomorrow when I'm going to be a member of the legislative branch. And, you know, depending on which rules I want to violate. He had his own branch. He had the Dick Cheney branch. And in effect, he made clearer than ever before that vice presidents should be forbidden to participate in the executive branch. Because when they do, you can't impeach a president. You have to impeach two people because they're a team. The vice president should be in reserve as an alternative to a president if a president goes criminal. But dozens and dozens of subpoenas of top officials in 2007 and 2008 simply laughed at, simply ignored. So what does Congress do? They've got all these Justice Department employees and former Justice Department employees just laughing at them. What do? They ask the Justice Department to enforce the subpoenas. Doesn't work out. So they take them to court. That's a real branch of government. We're just Congress. We just want to talk and not hurt anybody. But we'll take them to court in the judicial branch of government. You know, and still with one minor exception that's even more depressing and disturbing. They haven't enforced any of those subpoenas, haven't reissued them in the new Congress, and in fact, to my knowledge, have not subpoenaed a single person. And so in April, some of these torture memos are forced out by courts, and Senator Leahy, chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, says to a judge by the name of Jay Bybee, whose name is at the bottom of the worst memos, would you mind coming in and talking to us for a minute? The United States Senate, you might have heard of it. We're over here in Washington. And Jay Bybee says, no, go ahead without me. And Senator Leahy says, okay, sorry I troubled you. And that's it. No subpoena from any committee of anybody. But they did impeach somebody this year. And it didn't traumatize the nation. And you may not have even heard about it. They impeached a judge for groping his female employees. As is well known, the Constitution requires for impeachment that it be a Democrat and sex be involved. But if they are a member of the executive branch or a former member of the executive branch, and there's no sex involved, and they're a right-winger, and Fox News would not like it, then you cannot impeach someone. Right? I went from working closely with John Conyers in 2005, pushing toward the impeachment of Bush and Cheney when the Democrats wanted more seats and to have the majority and were promising the world, to being arrested in John Conyers' office, protesting his refusal to do anything and being told by him that Fox News wouldn't like it if he impeached Bush or Cheney. Well, this is why they won't impeach Jay Bybee. Remember this name, Jay Bybee, B-Y-B-E-E, Bybee, impeachbybee.org. If you cannot impeach this man, you cannot impeach anyone. If you cannot impeach anyone, you cannot subpoena anyone. If you cannot subpoena anyone, you're a bunch of courtiers and court jesters, which is, of course, what they want to be. But Alberto Gonzales left Washington, D.C., because one random Congress member took it into his head to put in a one-sentence bill. And because committees were subpoenaing him and making him come in and disgrace himself, but one Congress member put in a one-sentence bill that said, the House Judiciary Committee shall consider whether Gonzalez has committed impeachable offenses. If we could find one Congress member with the decency to write a one-sentence bill where you put Jay Bybee instead of Alberto Gonzalez and introduce that and get other Congress members to start signing on, and you could put some fear into the Justice Department. Because we can call the Justice Department all day. We can't unelect them. We can't defund them. We can't hurt them. Congress can. So if we can get our representatives in Congress to do something, even simply to subpoena someone and enforce it with the Capitol Police Force, as was done for the better part of U.S. history and hasn't been done for 75 years, and they're terrified of doing it, then you'd have another branch of government, the first and most powerful branch of our government, as it was meant to be on the playing field. The other thing that you could do with the House of Representatives, and for any of these things that I've said already, subpoenaing, impeaching, you don't need the Senate and you don't need the President. You only need the House of Representatives. And another thing that you can do with only the House of Representatives is end wars. You can end wars. Congress has the power to decide when and where we have wars and to enforce that power with the checkbook. If the House of Representatives gives no more money for wars, the Senate and the President and the military-industrial complex and the CIA and the secret permanent bureaucracy do whatever the hell they want, but they can't fight wars. So they don't have the money. The peace movement is pushing all kinds of strategies, and a lot of them are useful, and a lot of them help, but unless we're pushing for what will actually work, the easiest strategy to actually succeed, then we're hurting ourselves. And every time we have an election to end wars, we then immediately have a debate over whether to escalate the wars. This is what we did in the beginning of 2007 and in the beginning of 2009. And it's fine to oppose escalating a war and try to prevent it. But if you aren't talking about ending the war, you're talking about opposing the escalation as if the current level is adequate, you're destroying your hopes of ever ending it. And you're making the position, the extreme position of peace activists continuing the current war. Right? That could be a middle ground if there were a position better than that. And the position should be end it. Which we have almost a majority of Americans, and growing, that say bring everybody home from Afghanistan immediately. Right? And we have a majority that say they oppose, whatever that means, the occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq. So, there's a bill that says we should have an exit plan. Right? It could be, we're going to leave in 76 years by relocating to Mars. It could be anything. Because we should have an exit plan. Right? And so they're trying to pass that bill through the House. And it looks good for peace groups. They build co-sponsors. There's over 100 co-sponsors. It looks good for funders, And yet the fantasy of passing it through the Senate and getting the President to sign it is pretty extreme. And if you did, all it would do is reinforce the disastrous misimpression that deciding when to exit a war should be up to the Pentagon. Now there's another bill that's being pushed in the House, doesn't have as many co-sponsors, has some, that says we won't fund an escalation in Afghanistan. You can't use any money for an escalation in Afghanistan. The sheer lunacy of imagining the Senate passing that and the President signing it or overriding a veto. It's a nice gesture. It moves the discussion in the right way. It creates the possibility of putting that language into a spending bill, but alone it does nothing. And yet Congress members love it, activist groups love it. Building a list of Congress members who say, we will vote no, not we will vote yes on anything, but we will vote no on bills that fund these wars, that actually ends wars. And it looks harder to get started. It's harder to get a big list of commitments on that. But it's far easier in the end to succeed that way. That has to be our ideal. That has to be our demand. Now, in June, we had a big fight over a war supplemental spending bill, these things we weren't going to have anymore. And we had a situation where all the Republicans are voting no on the bill, committing treason according to what they've told us for the past 6 years, voting no on a war spending bill. And, and we could get this situation again where something else is in the bill and the Republicans are voting no because it will kill grandma or, Jesus will come back or whatever. And then you only need 40 Democrats to vote no and you block it. Right here, we only needed 39 in this case. And we got 32. We got 32 up against an all-out fight over a week. The president, the generals, the cabinet secretaries doing nothing but beating hell out of these people. Freshman Congress members told, you will be dead to us. We won't fund you. We won't vote on your bills and so on. Well, we got 32 to vote no when it still mattered. And that included Capuano, McGovern, and Tierney, but not Delahunt. Della won't, yeah. But Capuano, McGovern, and Tierney should be rewarded, praised when they do something like that. That was a very, very difficult thing to do. They have to be rewarded for that. If Capuano wants to go to the Senate, it's a useless place to go. I'd rather have good people in the House, but if you reward him for that kind of thing, and that's the reward he wants, to go to the Senate, then you're going to replace him with somebody that does the same. So it's not a loss. But trying to influence the Senate is almost impossible, and you don't need to. And trying to influence a president is almost impossible. I'm willing to just say impossible. And you don't need to. But everybody wants to. And I spend a lot of time talking about what the president is doing right and wrong. I think it's the role of bloggers and pundits and authors to talk about things and expose things. But I think telling groups of people to spend their day emailing the White House and calling the White House is a waste of energy that just leads to frustration. I think you focus on the House of Representatives. That's where you put your focus. And you ask them, you go to their events and talk to them face to face, you call, email, fax. You go to their offices. You work on them through the local media. You go to their offices and you sit there and you do not leave until they agree to leave Afghanistan and Iraq. You go there and sit there and cough a lot. Right? There's a serious problem. And you run candidate dates like Peter White against them. You use the tool of elections against them. You use every tool you've got because you can influence them. It is easier than people think. Even if you've named your congressman Della won't, he will with enough pressure. And or you may replace him. But there's a problem because, today they're voting on a health care bill that is not as good as 57 of them, including Delahunt, said was the bottom line. In July, they said they would not vote yes for a bill this bad. Everybody expects that they will. They may have already done it. It may not happen until late tonight. I don't know. But they're voting on this health care bill today or hoping to. And if they turn around and cave in and don't stand by their word, then their word becomes worth less. It means it's going to mean less to us next week if Congressman Delahunt says, I'll vote no on any war money, if he said he'd vote no on a lousy health care bill and voted yes. So you have to push them on any issue to keep their word, because that's the currency we have to work with.
Vote yes on the war money anyways.
Well, most of them vote yes on the war money. I'm proposing that the easiest way to end these wars is to get more of them to vote no on the war money and get them to publicly commit to vote no on any future war money. And some of them have, and I have a website called After Downing Street that has a growing list of those who have. And so with the Congress members like McGovern who have voted the right way, they have to publicly commit they're going to do that, and they have to lobby their colleagues to join them. I know people who've destroyed their family lives, spent their retirement savings, starved themselves to try to end these wars. A congressman can do more than vote the right way. I mean, it's such a freak incident when they actually vote the right way. You don't want to get greedy, but they can actually do more than that. They can publicly commit to it, and they can lobby their colleagues to join them. And that can be very, very powerful. As you know, in June, we passed another war supplemental spending bill, and we had progressive Congress members say, I'm going to vote for it because it's the last one, right? I mean, imagine, murdering children. So I'm just going to murder one more kid because it's the last one. What sense does that make? But that's what they said. They told us. And the next day, Congressman Murtha says there's going to be another one. And yesterday, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says we're going to need another one soon. This is to pay for the escalation that supposedly the president hasn't decided on yet or not. Although the Congress certainly has told the president he's free to decide without them. But Congressman David Obey, who chairs the committee that writes the bills in the House, has said in incredible reversal of where he's been for the past 6 years, we might not fund this insanity. So, we either have to find 40 people in a situation where the Republicans all think the bill is going to bring Satan to earth, or we need to find 218 people to vote no for some combination of right or wrong reasons, or we just need to find a couple missing pieces of David Obey's anatomy. That's it, because he does the bill. He runs the committee. So, work on Mr. Delahunt and also make some phone calls to Congressman David Obey. It's spelled like obey, appropriately enough. And in March, a lot of peace groups are going to try to do what we should have done years ago and have been trying for years, and that is to not march around on a Saturday and not disrupt business on one day and then leave, but to repeatedly, endlessly, day after day, nonviolently prevent what our government is doing in Washington. So if you can join us in Washington, D.C. in March, around the middle of March, please watch for announcements and plan to do so. And I've mentioned my book rather little, but a lot of what I've mentioned are themes that are in the book. It looks initially at what's gone wrong and what needs to be at the top of our agenda to reform and undo and change. But the second half at least looks at where we want to go and what rights we should have that we haven't even thought of yet, and how we can be more strategic in our activism to get there. So there's a lot of topics I'd be happy to talk about if you have any questions or ideas.